Today's guest is Hebh Jamal, Palestinian-American journalist.
I am based in Germany, so a lot of my work is around anti-Palestinian racism in Germany. They always keep me busy. They always tell you to be realistic. When you're under oppression, you don't really have a choice except to be hopeful, except to expect radical change, expect to be a part of that radical change. I also just came back from Gaza. The route to Gaza was completely traumatizing. This trip is only supposed to take 5 hours. For us, it took 2 whole days. Egypt's Sinai is one of the most militarized places on earth. No water, no food, no bathrooms. How complicit the Egyptian government is with the oppression of the Palestinians. Leaving Gaza, for example, is corrupt. There's something called tansiq, which is its official bribery service. The Egyptian military literally owns. You can skip all the checkpoints, profiting off of oppression.
Egypt said TSA pre-check for Gaza.
Right.
Hello and welcome to episode 67 of the Palestine Pod, the weekly podcast where we break down the latest headlines dealing with Palestine from all over the world and bring you stories, commentary, and interviews with the aim of supporting the Palestinian struggle for justice and equal rights. I'm one of your hosts, Lara. You might know me from Instagram as @GazanGirl, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mikey B.
What's up, y'all? Mikey B on TikTok, Michael Schertzer on Instagram. And you can call me Mikey Intifada if you just murked one of your own thinking he was Palestinian.
Yeah, awkward. Today's guest is Hebh Jamal, a Palestinian-American journalist and advocate currently based in Germany at NYC. Her work has appeared in 972 magazine, Mondo Weiss, amongst other major publications. Hebh, welcome to the Palestine.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hebh, give us an idea. What are you working on right now? What are the stories that inspired you and excited you? What is on your mind?
Sure, yeah. So, well, as you mentioned, I am based in Germany, so a lot of my work is around anti-Palestinian racism in Germany. They always keep me busy. That's something that I've, constantly been tackling. But I also just came back from Gaza, actually. I was there for about 3 weeks, and all that I've been thinking about is Gaza and my trip and, covering it. Specifically the route to Gaza, which was completely traumatizing and, way harder than I ever could expect. So that's actually what I'm focusing on, telling the stories of people from Gaza, trying as much as I can to tell my story as well, because it was the first time I visited.
We'd love for you to recap the journey and your trip and anything else you'd like to share.
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, I never, as I said, I never expected it to be the way it was. I mean, you land in Cairo and you hire a driver that's supposed to take you across the Sinai to the Rafah border crossing. This trip is only supposed to take 5 hours, right? For us, it took 2 whole days. I mean, I did not, I thought, it would take, a night, maybe a few hours, 8 hours. It took us 2 whole days. And that's because Egypt's Sinai is one of the most militarized places on earth, I think. There's checkpoints every 500 meters sometimes. I remember there was this one checkpoint. You drive an hour and a half across the Sinai and then you stop at this huge line with for us, it was over 100 cars with Palestinians inside it. It was a huge checkpoint. We were supposed to cross a ferry across the Suez Canal. And literally, Egyptian soldiers are supposed to inspect every single piece of luggage for 170 cars. And imagine in each van, there's 7 members of a family, right? So you have Egyptian soldiers inspecting every piece of luggage. For us, it took 10 hours under the Sinai sun. It was, I think it was 104 degrees or something. There's no water, no food, no bathrooms. It was complete hell. And it's so easy for the Egyptians to put something on the side, right? Because Palestinians, hundreds of them take this journey every single day. But yeah, they just didn't. There was nothing. We couldn't do anything. There's no service. There's no Wi-Fi. There's nothing. So we stood on the side of the road for over 10 hours until we were able to board the ferry across the Suez Canal. That's just one part of the journey. And yeah, so super, super, super harsh.
Did you go to Gaza as a journalist?
No, actually, my family, so my husband has Hawiyah from Gaza, so he has a Gaza ID. So, no one can really enter Gaza unless you're, have prior authorization, you're an international aid worker, or you're a Palestinian with a, Gaza ID. Not even a Palestinian from the West Bank or Jerusalem. No, you have to have a Gaza ID. And
yeah,
so
I'm a
I was
Palestinian
able to
from
enter.
Gaza. We don't have the Gaza ID. We can't go.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So you have to only if you have an ID, and my husband did. So I was able to enter with him. So yeah, that's how I was able. I feel very lucky that I was able to, but that's like the only way to how to. Yeah.
Right. And were you there during the latest assaults?
No, I left only a few days before, but my mother-in-law stayed. So I stayed, I went with, my in-laws, my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, and husband, and my, then 5-month-old son. And yeah, no, it was super, super tough. I didn't, fortunately we left right before the latest assaults. My mother-in-law is still there, however, so it was super, super scary. And I didn't know what to do. Like I was sitting in my house, I'm just like checking my phone every 2 minutes. I don't know what you can do in these situations. And now that I know the people, I know, my family-in-law that lives there. I made, connections. I know the people there. It was completely different, way worse than all the other ones, just because I know people, and super, super scary.
What was striking about Gaza to you during your visit?
I really went to Gaza, and I could not tell that this is a place where, like, you know, hundreds of people get killed by Israel. Like it was that happy. Like it was such a place filled with joy and potential and happiness and people craving for, a better life. Of course you see poverty, of course you see buildings that are destroyed and the floor, but at the end of the day, like I really felt that this was such a loving place and a beautiful place. Like, if they just let Gaza be, I think it would be one of the best tourist destinations in the world, for example. Like it was that much of an amazing experience. Yeah, I think that was the most shocking to me.
That's actually one of the reasons they keep destroying Gaza, is because it is so amazing and people are thriving even under the harshest circumstances. And so when things start to get even just a little bit tolerable, they have to knock things back down. They have to destroy buildings. They have to murder people. They have to destroy the morale that was built, right? Because we talked about this in 2021, how they targeted centers of commerce, right? They targeted like banks and commercial properties. They are systematically trying to destroy the will and possibilities for living in Gaza. Did you find joy in Gaza?
100%. Yeah, it was filled with joy. I mean, like especially my family-in-law, you enter a room and there's like a party happening all the time. There's people, whenever there's a wedding, you see like these caravans of people, like, the whole block is having a huge party, and it's filled with joy and it's beautiful, and I can't wait to go back again, really.
Yeah, I remember you posted a picture of your family enjoying the beach in Gaza, and I got kind of emotional looking at it. I was just so happy that you got to experience it.
Yeah, no, me too, definitely. Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the stories that you're working on as a result of your trip to Gaza?
Right, yeah. So I mentioned that I'm writing a story about specifically the journey there. Something that really resonated with me when I went there, and something that bothered me, was how complicit the Egyptian government is with the oppression of the Palestinians, and how much their security cooperation with Israel just makes everything incredibly difficult for Palestinians living in Gaza. The concept of leaving Gaza, for example, is completely corrupt. I mean, there's something called tansiq, which is basically this official bribery service where you would have to give money to the Egyptians in order to leave Gaza, and usually it could be very, very expensive. I mentioned that we went through with like this little van, right? There's this service called Yahala. It's this tansiq service where the Egyptian military literally owns. So it's a private company that the Egyptian military owns. And what they do is you can skip all the checkpoints, right? So there was like, tons and tons of checkpoints across the Sinai. You can skip all the checkpoints. You could, there's the actual the Rafah border crossing hall. Skip all the lines, hours and hours and hours of waiting. You don't have to wait on them. There's this luxurious, like I remember my husband was like, "Yeah, why don't you take a peek inside that room?" Right, we're sitting in this like filthy hall in the Rafah border crossing. He's like, "Take a peek inside that room." I'm like, "All right." I go inside the room. There's like a bar. There's there's like, it looks like a 5-star hotel, and we're sitting on like broken, filthy chairs, and it's just kind of like, okay, so you pay $700. It's $700 per person, sometimes even more when there's like an assault or something. So it turns out to be thousands of dollars for Palestinians. Like they're profitizing off of oppression, and like it's just yeah. So kind of like I want to, like, my next thing is kind of talking about how Egypt's private companies are just profiting off of, Palestinians trying to live and trying to leave and trying to come home. So, yeah.
Egypt said TSA pre-check for Gaza.
Right. Basically. Not even pre-check. Yeah.
Also, it's like, hold up, there's a bar. There are a ton of people consuming alcohol over there.
It was ridiculous. Yeah, it was something extraordinary. I mean,
mashallah, this alcohol.
Yeah, I don't know if they were even serving alcohol. I couldn't get in. Like, I'm not that rich. But yeah.
How you gonna hate from outside the club? You can't even get in.
Right. Yeah. There was this one moment that I think was very, very traumatizing for me, was when we were online, and my husband's been standing on this line for 5 hours and it wasn't moving. And so there was a line for, like, they said that there would be a line for women and children, right, to go faster. And so I go with my son, who's like kind of is like asleep in my arms, standing on this line. My sister-in-law is also like in front of me. And essentially, the military officer that's on the counter is like, I never said this line was valid. And people have been waiting on lines just to hand their passports to be stamped, like just to stamp the passports. We've been waiting online for like hours and hours. We go to this line. He's like, this line isn't valid. And people now are like super scared. They want to go back to the spots that they left in order to go to this line. And so what ended up happening was something I can only describe as like a mosh pit. And there's kids all around, like kids almost like trampled under me. There's one lady, she couldn't hold her child, and she asked me to hold hers because she didn't want him to be hurt. And I remember my sister-in-law takes, and people are just shoving, and it's absolute chaos. I look over to the military officers that are on the counter, and they're smoking their cigarettes, they're drinking their coffee and tea, they're just looking at us and not saying a word. Like, they just let complete chaos ensue. Yeah, it was completely horrifying. My sister-in-law had to raise Malik, my son, above her head in order for him not to be hurt or trampled or worse. And so everyone is crying, everyone is screaming, like actually everyone. We were all terrified. And I remember there's this one moment where he literally looks at us, like the actual military officer looks at us and was like, "Look at you, trapped like cattle." And I turn and I want to say something, and I want to like yell or jump the counter and punch him in the face. And my mother-in-law puts her hand like on my mouth and like holds me and like makes sure I don't do something, because if I do, I'd be arrested or probably worse.
This was an Egyptian officer?
Yeah. This was all Egyptian. Yeah.
Worst Travis Scott concert ever.
Yeah, basically, yeah. That's exactly how it felt like. Yeah.
I'm so glad that joke landed. That was a risky joke for me. As I was thinking it, I was like, ooh, if this bombs.
It's no secret that the Egyptian regime is a totally anti-democratic, super repressive regime that is actively involved in the oppression of Palestinians by maintaining the immoral siege of Gaza and participating in exactly some of what you've just described. I have friends and family that will tell me that interacting with Egyptian officers is sometimes feels worse than having to interact with the occupation soldiers.
100%.
Because you're supposed to be speaking the same language, you're supposed to be of the same faith, and yet the contempt with which they treat you, the absolute hatred almost with which they interact with you, is something that is really, you can't explain. And maybe we don't talk about it enough on the Palestine pod, but let there be no mistake, we are very much against the repression by the Egyptian regime of Palestinians and what they do to make it more difficult for Palestinians to reach their homeland. And it's also no secret that Egypt is one of, the largest recipients of US foreign aid after Israel. And, Mondo Weiss reported actually today, August 20th, about a $1.3 billion weapons package coming from the US to Egypt. And, the title of the article is US gives another $1.3 billion in weapons to Egypt's vicious regime to keep Israel happy. The idea being that for decades now, the US has been bribing Egypt to maintain good relations with Israel. And Egypt benefits by using that strength and weapons against its own people, against dissidents, and to maintain a strong position for itself in the region. And, if you look even just internally at what Sisi has done to his own people, anyone who dares say anything against the regime, imprisoned, tortured, killed, period.
And I definitely think that this chaos and incompetence is completely intentional. I mean, like, there are so many ways where you don't have to wait hours on a line to hand over a passport, right? But
of course.
because
I got into Scotland in about 20 minutes.
right, yeah. But so I definitely felt that the waiting, especially on checkpoints along the way, right? Like, if they're 500 meters from each other, it absolutely made no sense to me. And you wait 5 hours on one and another 5 hours on another, and they're not even a mile apart. It was completely intentional. It was just the concept of wearing out the Palestinian people so they don't try to leave, and they don't try to, either leave or return. Right. So that was something that I completely saw. And also it was completely random. You never know what you're going to get. It was really like you go to a checkpoint. You don't know if the soldier is in a bad mood, in a good mood. And no one knows what's going on. It's kind of like the logic of confusion. It's just, you're just confused the whole time, and you don't know what your experience is going to be like.
I once read about a judge who sentenced people to jail more often if he hadn't had lunch. So like after he came back from lunch, people would get off, people would get their sentences reduced. But if he hadn't eaten a tuna sandwich, somebody was doing life in jail probably.
It felt like that. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're describing is arbitrary, right? There's no consistency. And also, let's never forget how this current regime came to power, right? I mean, it was a military coup. They overthrew a democratically elected government. Israel got the US to support the coup. And here we are, yet again, allegedly, after Egyptian people bled in the streets of Tahrir Square, giving their lives for the possibility of living under a democracy that accepts and promotes human rights and freedom of expression and all these things that we hold dear, allegedly, went basically right back to where they started. Were passed off to the next strongman, after Mubarak. That basically, and what was it all for? Nothing.
Isn't it crazy how quickly the United States can come up with $1 billion when there's weapons involved? It's like, sure. If you asked for $1 billion for anything else, you'd get everybody in Congress being like, "It's not possible." You know what I mean? But they're like, "Let's send rockets over."
Yeah, but Michael, what's interesting is that they give this money, and the money for weapons, right? They have to buy it from the United States weapons manufacturer. So it's interesting. It's like they give billions of dollars to Israel and Egypt, and it's just kind of like, yeah, so here's $1 billion for you to buy weapons and stuff, but you have to buy it from us too.
It's an artificial subsidy, right? Exactly. They give them the money so that the money comes back to us.
It's like a coupon.
It's like a multi-level marketing scheme, actually. It's like selling Cutco knives. Like, hey, have you guys heard of Herbalife?
Yeah.
I have a friend who allegedly made 20 grand off of selling Cutco knives one time.
Allegedly.
I mean, I don't know. I didn't see it, but that's what she said. So, and she also tried to recruit me. I don't think, but
okay.
Not a very good friend.
I had a Mormon give me the same pitch.
Yeah. So also crazy how quickly the U.S. is, happy to support a coup and, defy democracy when that entity will support the apartheid state. Right. Because
this is true. Did you guys know this, that there is a Starbucks in CIA headquarters where they will not read anybody's name? So you get a situation where it's like, I've got a Cuda latte for Kim Jong-un is a bitch.
This is true.
Well, the first part is true. The second part was a joke. Glad I had to explain it to you again. Okay, we've been doing a podcast for over a year.
Wait, but how do you even know about the first part? I'm like curious. This is
Oh,
intriguing.
the first part?
Yeah.
Well, I look like Edward Snowden, so I get the memos. But like a budget version.
But you know what's interesting? At least the United States, they pay lip service to the concept of like, you know, democracy and like let there be peace or whatever. Germany is just like, you know, where it's just no, screw that. All Palestinians, they, you know, they basically deserve it almost. It really is. It really is. Like I currently live in a country where they, you know, it's just there's not even an effort to try to not be biased, right? There's not even like anything, right? Like if you publish something, say like 50 Palestinians died this last weekend, you got to add a sentence of like, yeah, but like, you know, it was because of Islamic Jihad provocation. Like there's no kind of like well-rounded anything where I live right now, and it's super frustrating. And that's how I got as many writing opportunities as I did. That's how I started journalism. It's just kind of like, you know, what the hell's happening here?
Germans, famously empathetic people.
The latest, one of the, you know, bigger stories that I've written was, you know, how Deutsche Welle, the German state broadcasting news company, fired like 7 Palestinian and Arab journalists, like for like no reason, and 2 of them were just proven not to be anti-Semitic by a German judge. So yeah, it's not a super cool place to live for Palestinians right now, even though Germany is one of the biggest places for Palestinian diaspora, like outside of the Middle East. So yeah.
Yeah, not a great place for Jews either.
Yeah, but and you know, not even like so even Jews who are anti-Zionist, like, you know, and the whole concept of Germany is trying to like pay for their, you know, sins, right? And so they just like bow down to whatever Israel says. But the problem is they treat anti-Zionist Jews exactly the same as they treat Palestinians. Like they will just blacklist them, arrest them, like brutalize them in a protest exactly the same as Palestinians. So it's not even like a respect. It's not even like identity politics in America. You say you're a Jew and you get all these privileges, or you say you're, you know, BIPOC and you could like, you know, speak for everyone. No, it's not even like that. It's just kind of like you have to be a certain type of Jewish person, certain type of.
You have to be one that supports fascism.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you're good.
Yeah.
Can you actually talk about how there was Palestinian organizations in Germany that had their protest canceled, and then also the corollary of those anti-Zionist Jewish organizations that had their protest canceled?
So after the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh, there was literally Jewish pro-Palestinian organizations who wanted to do a vigil. And the day before Nakba Day, the Berlin government said, we will ban all Nakba Day protests, all pro-Palestinian protests. And literally, these Jewish organizations that were planning a vigil, they banned their vigil for the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh, like a Palestinian-American journalist. It wasn't even a protest. It was a vigil. Like it was a vigil, right? And that's to the extent. And so when Palestinians did try to do something, they just wanted to do like a photo opportunity where everyone's wearing their keffiyeh and their flags. They were literally like all arrested. Over 150 people were arrested. They had to take their IDs, and I don't know if they even pressed charges at this point. One person had to go to the hospital because of Berlin police like slammed him on a car. Yeah, it was like they kettled everyone. Like they basically, if they suspect you were a part of the protest, they kettled you. And they took all their IDs, and so they would further charge them in the future. It was that, and literally a year ago, during the anti-COVID measures by these like right-wing neo-Nazis, all they did was they put a tent and they said you have to cover your neo-Nazi tattoos, and they let them have a protest. It was crazy. I'm just kind of like, wow, this is nice priorities.
So let me get this straight. The German government is allegedly fighting anti-Semitism by using state power to brutalize Jews.
Yeah.
Shout out the German government.
And also brutalizing Palestinians in the name of fighting anti-Semitism, but letting literal Nazis roam the streets.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
I mean, Germany, how they view it is that they believe that anti-Semitism in Germany is imported by the Arabs. They no longer have an anti-Semitism issue, even though in 2019 a far right white supremacist like went into a synagogue and killed a bunch of people. But neither here or there. They believe that literally anti-Semitism in Germany is not a problem, only when it comes to Arabs and the immigrant population, and that's how it is. Like that's the language that they use.
They thought it was imported, like olive oil. Like, what are you talking about? Imported?
Yeah, it's a phrase you could search. It's called imported anti-Semitism. That's the phrase that Germans
Wow.
use when it comes to anti-Semitism nowadays. They believe that they've eradicated their own anti-Semitism, and the anti-Semitism that exists is because of the Palestinians and Arabs.
Ah, it's the new wave of anti-Semitism, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Forget that old wave. We did the old wave, obviously, right? The old wave was us. We messed up. You know what I mean? Get over it. All right. Now, the new wave, though, that's the Arabs. That makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, if any of you have ever studied psychology, I encourage you to Google the words deflection and projection. Sounds to me like Germany has a deflection problem. It is curious that they seem to believe that they have eradicated anti-Semitism and that Palestinians, who are not responsible for the Holocaust, let me say it again, are the reason why anti-Semitism exists in their country. It's really a distraction to constantly have to be dragged into these conversations about anti-Semitism. We don't ever really address it on the Palestine pod because it's not worth our time. It's so obvious that what we're talking about is Palestinians having rights. And if you can't understand that me having a right has nothing to do with not liking somebody or being hateful towards somebody because of the religion that they practice, if you can't tell that those are two different things, then we can't even be in a conversation with one another. If I have to constantly explain to you that a person having civil, political, and economic rights in their land is one thing, and somebody acting hateful towards somebody else because of their religious background is something else, there's no point of common, there's nowhere to even begin to have a conversation.
Hey, do you want to know what anti-Semitism is actually? It's when state power is exerted on Jewish people for just being Jewish.
Right.
But you know why Germany does it? It's it's not like this innocent attempt to just be like, okay, Israel's the voice of the Jewish people, and like they actually believe that. No, what it is that they're trying to build their military power and be a world power again. So like, they can't do that because of the Holocaust. So what they do is they try to be like, all right, Israel's right in absolutely everything. So they pour billions of dollars right now into their military, and this is fairly new. So this is Germany just trying to like come back into the world stage, and this thing in the past is standing on them doing it, and so they just kind of like let Israel do whatever they want.
Don't call it a comeback. We've been fascist for years.
Right.
Did you do a TED Talk? I think you did.
Yeah, I did.
Do you want to tell us about it? Or was it not relevant?
If
it's not, we can move on. But I just wanted to give you a chance to discuss.
I don't even remember what I talked about.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
that's kind of a flex, dude. Yeah. Like, I did a TED Talk and I don't even remember, bro.
It was
like, oh, okay, sick, dude.
It was something about Palestine. I actually do remember. I spoke about the idea of like, how everyone talks about change, right? And how they talk about it as some impossible thing or something that is totally intangible. So they always tell you to be realistic, right? So my TED Talk was kind of about this concept of like, when you're under oppression, when you're a Palestinian, or when you're, one of like I'm within the civil rights movement, for example, you don't really have a choice except to be hopeful, except to expect a radical change, expect to be a part of that radical change. Yeah, and so I spoke about that concept of like, we don't have a choice except to be incredibly creative in how we try to liberate ourselves and hold on to that.
That's so relevant. It's going to be the title episode.
You're like, nah, it's nothing. It's just like,
it's nothing. It's just the tone of the show.
Right. Yeah.
Just liberation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I always get these like messages whenever I consistently talk about Palestine. It's kind of like, you need to take like a relaxing day. You need to, like just kind of mellow down and stuff. And I'm just kind of like, yeah, but like, I feel like I don't have a choice, right? I feel like as someone living in the diaspora, I feel like it's too in tune with my people. I don't feel like if they don't have a choice, I don't think I have a choice, right? And so yeah, and so that TED Talk was out of all of this frustration of just kind of like, I'm really tired of being called like a radical activist or whatever. I'm just someone who has hope and sees potential in my people.
Amazing.
It's like we have the energy now, right? And so while we have the energy, we should keep our foot on the gas as much as possible. One day we'll be old and we'll be tired. And
Right.
that'll be the time when we can rest and pass it off to the youth. But right now, like we're the ones holding the what's it called? The Olympic thing? They pass it off to each other.
The torch.
No, it's a baton. It's the baton.
Oh.
Oh.
The
I'm like,
torch.
the torch,
Nobody's passing the torch during a fucking running marathon. Like that's a fire hazard. You guys are wild. I know y'all love fireworks and shit, but that is not happening.
We both thought it was the torch. So
yeah. Okay. So I got to say the line because I fucked it up. Right now, we're the ones holding the batons. So we got to keep running.
yes.
You just published a very powerful poem on your Substack. Everybody should check out his Substack. It's a great resource for enlightening perspectives about Palestine. And I'd just love for you to take us through that poem. You want to read it for us?
Oh, wow. Coming out of left field here, Michael.
Yeah, that's like very intimate, Michael. Give her a chance to say no if she's not.
Well, I asked her a question. I mean, she can say no, but she published it online, so it's not like it's secret. I didn't steal it from her diary. You know what I mean?
Michael's like, I actually checked under your mattress. I am in Europe right now, so
it's not like I'm reading.
I am in your house.
So this poem, I think I published it like the other day. It was something that I wrote like 7 years ago. Like I wrote this a long time, and I was looking through my phone notes, and I'm like, damn, nothing has changed. Like that's how I, that's and I was just like, wow, like absolutely nothing has changed. And so I published it, and I was just like, yeah, 7 years later and everything's exactly the same. I could read it to you if you want. I mean, I actually won a poetry contest with this poem. So.
Oh wow. Oh, now you have to read it.
Flex.
All right, I'm just like, let me just.
We're gonna put that in your bio.
Poetry contest winner, high school poetry contest winner. Yeah,
and nonchalant TED Talk speaker.
Oh man, I actually wrote that TED Talk the night before. That's why I read it off of index card. I couldn't memorize it. All right, are you guys ready?
We're ready.
Like spoken word, you gotta snap. So, all right, anyway. I woke up to the sound of bombs and my baby brothers screaming under the rubble. What? Did you think I was going to start slow and gradually lead up to the words that no one wants to hear? As if pain and suffering come slowly, as if the colonizers give you a warning to the time of your death, as if blue birds, blue skies, and blue waters are the reality to a Palestinian sea when they wake up. It doesn't exist. Like Qaria Jimzu, the village where olive trees are plentiful and happiness a possibility. Sorry, was a possibility. Jimzu was ethnically cleansed in 2 days by an Israeli assault. Even in our dreams, black birds, dark skies, red waters. I woke up in a place less beautiful. I woke up in a place where textiles torture my other half. I live in a place where the clothes that I'm wearing covers me, yet strips me from my dignity, strips me from empathy. Because what is heard of us when Palestinian boys are taken from their homes and used as human shields? You hear that? Silence. Silence through the bombs that are dropped in Gaza. Silence through the cries of the wrongly persecuted prisoners. Silence through the pleas of help made by our mothers. Silence through the sounds of bullets entering our bodies. Silence. Because we love our material objects, our HPs and soda streams. We love our current lives and HD TVs. Blackbirds, dark skies, red waters. I woke up in a cell. My name was Shafiq al-Hawamda. The year 1989, I was tied down. He sat on my chest. I felt as if my bones were breaking. You can only breathe, he said, if you confess to something you didn't do. I fell back asleep to only dream of blackbirds, dark skies, red waters. Knock, knock. The door of the cell opens, yet I pray that it's the angel of death. Irhamni ya Allah, I shouted. All I wanted was to be free. All I wanted was to be. 2017. I wake up hoping it's different than before. Yet what I found when I opened the news, Syrian refugees are being washed ashore, Palestinian rights are still being ignored, Iraq is being thrown into another political war, Burma has more deaths than they account for, Yemen has a 9/11 every time someone steps out the door. It's not meant to be this way. Blackbirds, dark skies, red waters. It doesn't have to be this way. I ask you to feel, ask you to realize that the reservations that we set aside for action are intentional. Ask you to realize that the only way people oppress is if we let them. Realize that we can wake up to bluebirds, blue skies, blue waters. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, that took the mood in a different direction.
Yeah, I know. That's why, Michael. You can't be throwing poetry at these people. Honestly, this is like the only poem I've ever written. So the last poem.
That's why I don't book slam poets on my shows anymore.
You used to do that.
Yeah.
At comedy shows?
Well, just like variety shows.
Right, because they would kill the mood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They would just
Hard act to follow. You know what I mean? Because it's like, it's that. And then it's like, hey, my name's Michael. Dating is weird. Okay.
Right. Yeah. It's weird. I wrote that poem and I couldn't write poetry after it. It was like, so it's the only poem like I really ever wrote.
I read your piece about Ibrahim Nabulsi, and I didn't realize he was 18 years old.
He's 18, man. He was born
I thought
in
he was like
2003.
30. I thought he was like 30.
He was born in 2003, and I think that kind of blows my mind. And
so wild.
God.
Allah yarhamu, may he rest in peace. The death of Ibrahim Nabulsi, I think, hit me in ways that I never expected. Only because, and I write this in my piece, it's kind of like, we always hear that people die. We hear that children die. We hear, every resistance fed, we always hear about their deaths, but what's crazy is that we never hear their last words. And I think it was the last words that he said, and it was what he said that made me never forget him, and never forget the story, and so his story. So and maybe if you want to tell your viewers about him,
we've definitely in the last couple of episodes we've started to share a little bit of his story. We covered how he escaped from attempts on his life by the occupation. We covered when he was finally killed by the occupation, a brutal raid.
Yeah, thanks for listening to the pod.
Sorry. He's putting me on blast. Okay.
Yeah. No, but I think your point is really wise and really thoughtful. We don't often know what the last words of those who are murdered in the fight for liberation, trying to free Palestine, fighting for their rights. We don't know what their last words are. And the fact that Ibrahim called his mom and he said to her, I'll read his words. He said, "I love you so much. If I'm martyred, guys, I love my mother. Take care of the homeland after I'm gone. And my final will to you, on your honor. Don't let go of the rifle, on your honor. I'm surrounded and I'm going towards my martyrdom. Pray for me."
Yeah. And I think what's interesting also is that they think people like that, they they're so ready to die at any moment's notice, and they crave death or anything, right? That's
racism. That's just racism. Right. That's just anti-Palestinian racism, and we need to just say that.
These are talking points of the Zionists of like, these fighters, these terrorists, they just they instill the young people the concept of martyrdom, and now everyone wants to be martyred. No, not really. It's like they crave life. They crave life so much that they're willing to risk everything for it. And that's what Ibrahim meant to me, is that he wanted a better life for his mother, for the people around him, for the next generation. And he was only 18 years old. And And if a young Palestinian, young adult could it affects him that much that he picks up a rifle in order to fulfill on that. I think that's incredibly powerful, and it's something that we should honor. And the
100%.
idea of us not honoring resistance fighters, I used to not say anything, because you could risk your job, you could risk your livelihood if you say that you support the Palestinian resistance by any means necessary. But at this point, it's just like, if you don't honor him, then you're not doing anything really for the Palestinian liberation.
So that comes from the Zionist propaganda, right? The idea that we have to be good victims, the idea that we have to play by their rules, the idea that the only good resistance is nonviolent resistance, when in fact we know that that's a lie, because they repress all forms of resistance, whether it's armed or not armed. The idea that even decades and decades of nonviolent resistance have led us absolutely nowhere. That includes negotiations and diplomatic efforts and all of this.
Right.
The idea that they are the most violent entity in this whole process, and yet they have the audacity to condemn our attempts to use resistance to free ourselves.
Yeah, they're like, hey, we stole all this land with guns, but how dare you pick one up?
Yeah, and we have nukes, but how dare you
throw rocks at us?
Yeah, or have this rifle. Like, what are we talking about here? We don't have nukes. Like, they're the only nuclear power in the Middle East. Like, why doesn't anyone talk about that?
Exactly.
So, but that's all from
because when you do talk about it, you disappear. You end up in a suitcase in a Dubai hotel room.
Oh, Michael, it's so true.
It's not even jokes at this point.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not.
No, I'm actually just reporting the news. I'm not writing jokes.
But, here's the thing. You can't deprive people of their freedom and expect them to lay down and die. We are human, just like everybody else on this planet, and we deserve life just like everybody else on this planet, and you can't deprive us of it and expect us to accept it and expect us to say, oh yeah, no, that's okay, that's fine, you can take our land, you can take you can rob us of our identity, you can separate us from our loved ones, you can jail us, you can do all of that, you can torture us, you can murder us, you can drop bombs on us whenever you feel like it, you can mow the lawn, you can impose a siege, you can do all of that, but we're just going to hold a banner or like a sign at a protest, and we're going to wait for you to decide whenever that happens to stop.
Right.
That's not how this works. That's not how anyone has ever freed themselves.
It's completely backwards to think that if Palestinians were not armed, did not participate in armed resistance, that Israel would not do what it's doing in Gaza, for example. It's complete bullshit. Like, that's just absolutely not true. Like, if we look, there was actually Israeli settlements within Gaza. People don't know this. Like, people really, they see, if Hamas wasn't there, if whatever wasn't there, then Gaza would be free. That's just not true. When Israel was in Gaza up until 2005, there was settlements in Gaza, there was checkpoints. Palestinians were not able to go to the beach. That's 5 minutes from their house. I know people that were not, they were telling me, they were recounting the moments when Israel was within Gaza, like actual settlements, and they told us that, like, because of the checkpoints, they couldn't see their siblings that were just 5 minutes away for over 10 years. And that's something that people don't realize, is if it wasn't for armed resistance, Israeli settlements and checkpoints would still be in Gaza right now.
But then also, because Israel evacuated its settlements from Gaza ever since 2005, they have used that as an opportunity to pound Gaza from the sky.
Exactly.
And so, armed resistance or not, it doesn't matter, because the settler colonial entity is on a mission to implement its project. And it's going to do that regardless of how we, as its colonial subjects, as the people that are under its power, are going to behave.
They tried to colonize Gaza in the same way that they've been splitting up the West Bank, and it just didn't work. And so now they're like, oh, okay, we're going to drop bombs then. How about that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's crazy that, like, the Zionists will say that Palestinians are taught to hate, when it's like, have you ever seen the inside of an Israeli school? Who is chanting death to Arabs in the street? Like, it's not the elderly, right? It's these youth, it's these weirdo fascist kids.
What's very dystopian is that they're very able to detach themselves from the crisis. Like they're able to think about 100,000 other things, whereas Palestinians, the only thing they can think about is the occupation. And so when they're like, "Oh, you guys are so obsessed with us," I've seen this talking point. Palestinians are so obsessed with us. We're just living our normal lives. Exactly, like you're exactly proving my point.
Palestinians would love to live normal lives if outside of your wall and your checkpoints and your bombs. That's precisely the point.
Yeah,
And
the Israelis are worried about traffic. And it's like, you got private roads. You've got segregated roads. You're worried about the traffic on your segregated roads?
Yeah.
It's also a really awkward flex by an apartheid state to be like, we're just living our lives where everybody is in the military. Like, those are just our lives.
Can you imagine if somebody was like, the line is too long at this whites-only water fountain?
I feel like that's how it is. It's basically, yeah.
And then also there's like another thing about teaching them to hate. Like the Zionist kids, they go to these weapons expos like before they're even born. You know what I mean? Like you got fetuses playing with AK-47s. Like, what's going on?
I have a friend who grew up in the apartheid state and then moved back to the US. Her parents were originally American, and then they moved there, and then they moved back. And she spent some of her early years in elementary school there, and she talked about the militarization that begins as early as kindergarten. Visits from the occupation army, and let's show you our guns, and look at us, we're so strong. And
bro, the occupation army tried to recruit me in America, and I was like, nah.
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean? Like, if I'm gonna commit war crimes, I'm gonna do it for the United States.
Yeah, that is an awkward deal. Like, come die for us. Well, you won't die. You'll just sit in a control room and,
Well, you will die if they mistake you as a Palestinian.
True.
Thank you so much for coming on the pod and sharing your perspectives, your stories, everything you're doing. We appreciate you so much, and we respect you so much. And you're just such a light in such a dark time. So thank you for your time.
No, thank you guys. Really, I had so much fun, and I feel like I could stay and talk to you guys for another 4 hours. But yeah, thank you guys so much again.
Folks, that's been another episode of the Palestine Pod. Thank you all so much for listening. Go ahead and check out our website, www.palestinepod.com. Follow us on Instagram at @thepalestinepod. Send us an email at palestinepod@gmail.com. And check us out on Patreon, www.patreon.com/PalestinePod. That's been another episode of the Palestine Pod. Thank you all so much for listening. Have a great day.